Before the first sword was lifted in anger, before the first wall was breached, or the first empire crowned itself eternal, humanity discovered a force more enduring than armies and more obedient than fear, a force that could command loyalty across generations, justify suffering as virtue, and transform obedience into salvation. And that force was belief. Because from the moment humans began to ask why the sun rose and why death came, those who claimed to speak for the unseen gained power over the seen. And long before empires learned how to conquer land, they learned how to conquer minds, because a man who fears punishment may rebel when the whip is gone. But a man who fears the gods will police himself even in silence. And so religion did not merely accompany empire, it became its foundation, its shield, and its most devastating weapon, shaping history in ways that armies alone never could. In the earliest river civilizations, where floods determined survival and drought meant death, rulers quickly realized that explaining nature meant controlling people. And in Mesopotamia, kings declared themselves chosen by the gods not because they were virtuous, but because divine approval erased the need for consent, turning obedience into a cosmic duty rather than a political choice. And when laws were carved into stone and attributed to heaven itself, defiance became not merely criminal, but sacrilegious. Because how does one argue with a command said to come from the universe? And as cities grew and societies stratified, religion provided the moral framework that made inequality feel inevitable. Because if hierarchy was divine, then resistance was rebellion against order itself. And nowhere was this more perfected than in ancient Egypt, where the pharaoh was not a representative of the gods, but a god incarnate, living proof that power and divinity could merge into a single, unchallengeable authority. And the pyramids that still dominate the desert were not just monuments to death, but to control, because they were built by generations who believed their labor sustained cosmic balance. And when belief turns labor into worship, empires can extract unimaginable resources without chains. As empires expanded, religion evolved from local myth into imperial ideology, adapting itself to conquest, absorbing gods, rewriting rituals, and reshaping identities, because belief that cannot adapt cannot rule. And in Persia, religion became a language of moral order, framing the empire as a guardian of truth against chaos, allowing obedience to feel righteous and rebellion to feel destructive. While in India, rulers intertwined power with sacred duty, embedding political authority into spiritual obligation so deeply that social roles themselves became holy. And when society is organized by divine command, inequality survives not through force, but through acceptance, because people endure suffering more easily when told it has meaning. Rome, perhaps more than any empire before it, understood that religion could unify diversity, and for centuries it ruled by allowing conquered peoples to keep their gods as long as they honored Rome, because loyalty mattered more than belief. But this tolerance had limits, and when belief threatened unity, it became treason, because refusing to honor the emperor was not simply faithfulness to conscience, but a denial of imperial authority. And when Christianity emerged with its promise of salvation beyond the state, Rome first tried to crush it, then learned from it, because the greatest strength of empire lies not in suppression, but in appropriation. And when Constantine embraced Christianity, the faith transformed overnight from a marginal belief into a pillar of state power. And suddenly, bishops became administrators, doctrine became law, and salvation became entangled with obedience. Because once the empire spoke with the voice of God, dissent could be framed as sin rather than disagreement. And even as Rome fell, its religious machinery survived, passing into medieval Europe, where kings ruled by divine right and crowns were sanctified by clergy who claimed heaven's approval, creating a system where power flowed downward, but accountability flowed upward into the invisible. And when rulers failed, it was not for the people to judge, but for God, a convenient arrangement that shielded authority from earthly challenge. The Crusades revealed the full destructive potential of weaponized faith, because convincing men to kill strangers is difficult, but convincing them that killing is holy transforms violence into virtue. And peasants marched across continents believing suffering was salvation and death was victory, while empires learned that religious identity could unite fragmented populations more effectively than shared language or culture, because a common enemy defined by belief creates bonds stronger than blood. And in the Islamic world, faith and state intertwined differently but no less powerfully, because Islam emerged not only as a religion but as a complete social, legal, and political framework, offering rulers a system that governed life from birth to death. And as empires expanded, conversion often followed conquest, not always through force, but through incentives, because belonging brought protection, opportunity, and inclusion, and belief reshaped populations quietly, enduringly, without the backlash of mass violence, proving that persuasion outlasts terror. Yet religion was not only a tool for expansion, it was a tool for control, because when empires grew too vast and loyalty weakened, rulers turned inward, branding dissent as heresy and rebellion as blasphemy, because a political enemy can be negotiated with, but a spiritual enemy must be destroyed. And throughout history, accusations of heresy served as convenient weapons against rivals, reformers, and challengers, silencing opposition under the weight of divine condemnation. And as Europe entered the age of exploration, religion sailed alongside canons, because colonization was framed not merely as conquest, but as salvation, and entire civilizations were dismantled under claims of divine mission, languages erased, rituals forbidden, and identities rewritten. Because to rule a land permanently, one must first redefine how its people understand the world, and when destruction is labeled holy, it becomes righteous. When exploitation is framed as enlightenment, it becomes benevolent, and faith, once again, proved capable of justifying cruelty on a scale that naked ambition never could. Even as the modern world emerged, with science rising and monarchies falling, religion did not disappear from power. It adapted, becoming intertwined with nationalism. Because nations themselves were sacralized, borders became sacred, flags became symbols of destiny, and wars were fought not only for territory, but for divine purpose. And in the 20th century, leaders learned that belief still mobilized masses, even in an age of reason, because faith speaks to identity, fear, and hope in ways facts cannot. And authoritarian regimes borrowed religious structures, even when rejecting religion itself, creating rituals, sacred texts, martyrs, and promises of salvation through obedience, proving that the mechanics of belief transcend theology because humans crave meaning, and those who provide it gain power. Yet history is not a simple tale of manipulation, because the same faith used to build empires has also inspired resistance, revolutions, and moral awakenings, and scriptures wielded to justify domination have been reinterpreted to challenge injustice, proving that religion itself is not inherently oppressive, but dangerously malleable, a forge capable of creating chains or keys depending on who controls it. And the tragedy of history lies not in belief, but in its monopolization. Because when rulers claim divine authority, they silence debate. When states declare holy purpose, they excuse cruelty, and when belief becomes law, humanity becomes secondary. And even today, echoes remain, because modern politics still invokes sacred language, still divides the world into righteous and wicked, still mobilizes belief to justify power, reminding us that the most dangerous weapon is not one that destroys cities, but one that shapes minds. Because empires do not fall only when armies are defeated, they fall when belief shifts, when people stop accepting that power is sacred and authority is ordained. And perhaps the greatest lesson history offers is not that religion built empires, but that empires survive only as long as people believe they should. And once belief changes the throne, no matter how ancient or divine it claims to be, inevitably collapses.